Hello. Thank you all for being here. My name is Lawrence. I'm the founder of LARPing in Color, and this is our first webinar. So we're very excited to be here and be able to present some resources for anyone who wants to be here, anyone who is interested in diversity and inclusion in live action roleplay and tabletop. All of these things we want to be able to just provide some material for representation. And so we're super excited to be able to present some information and some story here. So before we get started, I just want to throw a couple of call outs here. So we have just launched both our website and our first fundraiser for helping us be able to do more here to both create resources to find people who can consult for paying those individuals for basically we would like to be able to give anyone who is interested or anyone who needs help with diversity the ability to go to our website, which is larpingincolor.com, and be able to find those resources really easily. And if you can't find those resources, then we can reach out to us and we can help you find those resources. That is the primary cause for our fundraiser here. Some of these things, like we want to pay people for the work that they're doing. We believe in paid emotional labor. We believe in paying people for the work that they're doing. And we just want to make sure that those people get paid. We want to make sure that these resources are available. And we just want to eliminate any possibility that someone who wants to get into this hobby can't get into the hobby because it wasn't built for them. That's kind of been my story, but I don't want to get into my story right now. We have a much more interesting story to present. We have more resources that we want to present today. So additionally, we'd like to thank our friends at Make Believe for hosting this live stream. They've been an incredible resource. They're going to be live streaming for us later this week. I think that's tomorrow. So please, by all means, there's going to be, if you haven't already seen the cards that have been scrolling, there's information about the other events that we're going to be doing. Please check out the dozens of people who have helped us bring this fundraiser together, bring this website launch together, bring this Twitch stream together. And this will be available on YouTube and on our website once we're done. So thank you, Make Believe, for making that happen. Additionally, we also want to thank Playable Theater, who is partnering us with us for our raffle. So if you want to win some prizes while also helping us over here at LARPing in Color, there's all kinds of prizes, tons of really fun stuff that you can win over there, including LARP tickets. If you want character art done and you need some help paying for that, there's ways that you can win money to help get paid for. So lots of cool things are there. You don't have to pay for the first ticket, but again, we do encourage you to get 2 tickets. That's kind of what this whole purpose is for, but by all means, at least check it out. You can find that information on our website, that's larpingincolor.com, but there should also be links in the chat as well. All right, so that's all I've got to say. Thank you so much for hearing me rattle on for a second. Let's get to the primary reason that we're all here today. So I'd like to present our speakers for today. First off, we have Mytrice Allen of the University of Kansas. And then additionally, we have Dr. Douglas Allen, Assistant Professor of Social Sciences at Emporia State University. We want to thank you so much for stepping out here, for coming out and telling us a little bit more about diversity and inclusion in LARP and how we can just make that something that's accessible and about your journey getting there. So with no further ado, I'm going to throw the mic over to Mytrice. Thanks so much.
No problem. I'll do like a really brief introduction of myself, and then Douglas, you can introduce yourself briefly. Like Lawrence said, I'm Mytrice Allen. I currently work at the University of Kansas. That's behind my name because I've worked in higher education for some time now, and that usually means something when you're talking to higher education audiences. I don't currently do diversity inclusion work there as a paid position. I specifically do committee work there. But I'll go more into kind of my background, and I'll go ahead and let Doug do a brief introduction before I get into who I am.
Hi, I'm Douglas Allen. I am a professor of social sciences, specifically in geography, where I study community affirming practices of place. So looking at how social justice makes place and how places can help make social justice. I got into diversity work by doing a whole bunch of workshops on diversity and inclusion when I was doing my PhD. And I've always been interested in it because I think everybody is a practitioner before they end up becoming an expert. And so part of my practicing that began was when I was doing my teaching in high school level. And so I kind of brought that into my hobby when I started LARPing.
So a bit more about me and kind of my background. From an education standpoint, I got my associate's degree at Georgia State University in foreign languages. I got my bachelor's degree in organizational leadership. I was starting to work in higher education, and so that's why I went into that. My master's degree is currently in progress. I'm working to get an instructional design and technology master's, and I have 2 certificates in diversity, one generally diversity inclusion from Florida State University, and one that I just finished, I just graduated, for disability inclusion at the University of Kansas. And so I kind of got my start professionally in diversity inclusion. Well, I'll go back even a little further. I kind of got started just because I am a Black woman, and so these issues affected me, and so I had to deal with them whether I wanted to or not. It didn't really start as I am passionate about diversity. It was starting with I'm passionate about me belonging in spaces, and then realizing other people felt that they didn't belong too, and then that's when it kind of went over to becoming a passion. Because if I felt that way, then there's lots of other people that are feeling that way. And I knew I hated feeling that way. So that's why I kind of branched out into wanting other people to feel welcome and included in spaces. And so I got my start doing that in 2000, and I want to say 14 is when I started at Florida State University. There was a diversity and inclusion council, the council on diversity and inclusion. I'm going through a lot of acronyms in my head, so you'll see me thinking a lot. Where I got my start kind of with committee work. And the first thing I learned about committees is committees do a lot of work but don't get a lot done, because when you're doing a committee, generally it's unpaid work at an institution that is using your labor to kind of make a more diverse and inclusive environment, but also not, because they're not paying you to do it. And so you have your full-time job, and on top of that, you have to do this additional work that just should be done, right? But you also can't say no to it because the work is important. So I got started doing a lot of committee work and trying to make change at that level. As far as LARPing, I got started LARPing in 2010, I think. So it's been a long time. It makes me feel old saying I know people have been LARPing for so much longer. They're going to call me a LARP baby for my 11 years. But yeah, so and something really important about LARPing, especially to marginalized communities, is that as a Black person, I'll just say it, I didn't know what LARPing was, and I wasn't interested in it because I at the time was like, this doesn't seem like something a Black person would do. And when I go on the internet and I search what is LARPing, right, I see a lot of pictures of white people in the woods, and I'm just like, I'm not white and I don't like going in the woods. This doesn't seem like a thing I want to do. But I had a friend that was really encouraging, because I was really into anime at the time, and so I did a lot of cosplay. I was really into cosplay, so she's like, hey, you can do cosplay, but with a lot of people kind of over a weekend. And I was like, all right, I'll give it a try. So I started LARPing, and I found it interesting. My first experience wasn't great, but that was just because it was raining, and I didn't know that I was supposed to bring sheets or multiple socks. I made a lot of bad choices. I didn't know what to do. But I found my first LARP experience pretty welcoming, and that's the reason I kept coming, because I think if I hadn't found the people friendly and welcoming, that would have just been the final nail in the coffin of I already feel like this isn't a place where I'm supposed to be, and I don't feel welcomed here. So that's the number one reason why you want your LARPs to show people that they belong, right? And you want to reflect that when you're showing people LARPs as well. Because like I said, when I looked it up, all I saw was a bunch of pictures of white people, and I felt like that wasn't a place for me. And a lot of times when you look at things like that and you don't see kind of any kind of reflection of yourself, you don't feel comfortable putting yourself in those spaces. So it was really important to me to figure out how to kind of marry the idea of making inclusive spaces in a hobby that I cared a lot about, because not every LARP is as good as the first one I went to. I'm sure people have had many experiences where they got there and they still felt out of place, and people were doing things that still made them feel uncomfortable. And especially when you go to a LARP and you see that the staff on the LARP or the directors of the LARP are also trying to make those spaces comfortable for you and will fight for you, that's another reason you want to keep going. And being able to have those hard conversations about why we should and should not be doing certain things is really important. So, like I said, I got all that to say. I got started kind of doing this more professionally around 2014 when I started doing committee work. And I was lucky enough that when I left Florida State University, I was accepted into a position as a program coordinator for inclusive excellence at Vanderbilt University, which is a pretty big university in the Nashville area. And that was the first time I ever had real power to do anything, to make any change. And that really changed me a lot, because it's when you have a passion and when you're working on it, and when I want to make these spaces, and you kind of get shut down a lot, it's hard. And you kind of want to stop, especially when you're not being paid for it, right? I'm not being paid. I'm putting in a lot of labor. I'm giving you ideas, and you're telling me that's nice, but I'm not going to do it. So going to Vanderbilt really changed my life, because for the first time in a long time, I felt appreciated and listened to. As with any university or organization or institution or group, they have problems, but just the fact that they were willing to hire me as a person to focus on these issues, and I had the power to say, hey, I want to make these changes and do this. How do I go about it? And they go, however you want, just you do you, and we got a budget, we'll fund you. And so that idea is something that I would like to see LARPs doing more. And I know it's hard. It's always hard to pay people for things. And I am one of those people who have put in so much labor and have not accepted money for so long. And that's a thing that I'm trying to change about myself, because I'll see like the need for something and I'm like, okay, I want to help. I want to do this. It's even now, like in my position at University of Kansas, we had to move because of COVID issues to Kansas. And so I couldn't continue my job there, but I joined committees here. And once again, as you're going back to committees, your voices that are kind of just there to tell people things, and then they don't listen to you. But having actual, like some kind of system in place where you have people who are experts in diversity and inclusion come in and tell you what needs to be done, and actually listening to them and implementing them, that's what's really important. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into LARPing, and how I got, I've done my diversity work over time. And the reason why I became a diversity consultant even, and that's a funny story. It actually wasn't my idea. I had been doing the work at higher education institutions, and then someone reached out to me and said, hey, you have the expertise in this. Could you help me with a LARP? And I was like, yeah, I could do that, because I know I'm a LARPer. I also have expertise in diversity and inclusion. I think I can do both of those things. And I never had really thought about consulting, like on the side of, of also working full time and also trying to go to school. It's hard, but I thought it was important work. And I was like, yeah, I can help with that, because I want to make sure that you're doing the right thing as much as possible. I also wanted to do that if I ever got on a LARP staff. I was hoping to get on a LARP staff before COVID. I wasn't able to, because, like I said, because I had to move and everything. But the first thing I wanted to do was definitely have those inclusion initiatives, because, like I said, I almost never got into LARPing just because I didn't see people who looked like me. It was hard for me to get into fantasy because I didn't see people who looked like me. Like, I had to imagine and kind of impose these ideas of characters that were kind of like me to make me feel like, I was included in that world. So the number one thing I would tell LARPs is to try to reflect that as much as possible in your values as a LARP, and to even integrate it into your policies, but not at like a compliant. Well, it's not really, this is a little different for LARPs. In higher education, we talk a lot about compliance, because you have to have a certain amount of compliance around diversity and inclusion. LARPs don't have to do that, but by not doing it, you're pushing a lot of people away and a lot of people out, and you're losing a lot of interesting voices and characters and people and experiences that are only going to make things better. So it's really important to make sure that those voices are heard and uplifted. And if you know someone who has the expertise who can help you with that, you should talk to them. And like I said, I'm the number one culprit for not being paid for friends saying, hey, can you help me with this thing? And I'm just like, yes, as your resident brown friend, I will assist you with this. But like Lawrence was saying, normalize paying people for that labor, because a lot of times what people don't understand or think about is minority taxing. And that's when, and I said minority taxing is usually, that's the actual term, but any marginalized group, right? Not just minorities, but asking the person who fits into that category to help you with it. So you want to have a thing about women. You're going to ask the woman that you know, like, hey, you're a woman. Can you help me with this thing? Like, just because you live those experiences don't make you an expert. So there's two different levels of that. Like at the beginning, I was a person who lived those experiences, but I wasn't necessarily an expert in diversity and inclusion, because it's a little bit more than just who I am and how it affects me. And that's what happens when you, especially when you tax people and you ask people and you just drag them into things. I won't name names, but I know a person who applied for a position completely unrelated to diversity and inclusion, but because she was a Black woman, they said, hey, we also want you to be our chief diversity officer for this unit. And she didn't ask for that. She didn't want to do that, but she couldn't say no. It was a great position. And she's like, well, if I say no, then maybe they won't hire me. So now they've put like this just extra position on her and all this extra labor on her that she didn't want to do. But they assumed she was an expert in it because she was a Black woman. And we have this a lot in higher education, where we have people who are in high positions, who are professors, who are possibly deans or associate directors in all these different departments. And they go, well, you're Black and you're an engineer, so you must know a lot about Black kids trying to be engineers. So we're going to make you lead the Black engineers program. But yeah, you might be those things, but that doesn't mean you actually know what to do. You have those experiences, but you don't, just because you have lived them doesn't mean you can, understand, I guess, fully. I think that's what I'm trying to say. I'm kind of losing my train of thought on that, but it's, the idea is that don't ask people to just do things because you assume they know the information. Try to find actual people who are actually doing the work, know what they're doing, and then you get better perspectives. And and as a person who's doing a diversity consulting, you want to be sure that you have perspectives that expand beyond just yourself. So when I'm talking to people, I don't look for things that would only affect me. Like I don't go comb through information and go, okay, what would affect me or make me upset as a Black person or as a woman? You want to try to think about any group that's marginalized at all and be able to talk about all of those things. And so with that, there is some need for understanding like what's going on in DEI work, and that's diversity, equity, and inclusion work. There's a million acronyms you'll learn as you're coming into diversity work, because you have D&I, diversity, inclusion, DEI, they throw in equity, sometimes they throw in justice, sometimes they throw in anti-racism. They change the acronym all the time. And another thing you want to do when you're doing diversity and inclusion consulting is be careful about buzzwords. I learned about this recently. Institutions will oftentimes throw out buzzwords to make themselves seem like they're a diverse institution. And they say, we practice anti-racism. And you go, oh, well, wow, that's great. That's good. I love that. What are you doing? And they're like, we handed out a book about how to be an anti-racist. And it's like, okay, what else are you doing? Do you know what that word means? And they're like, how to not be racist. And so you get a lot of the kind of just words that they kind of latch onto, and they kind of throw them out at you. And they're like, yeah, just because I know these words, now I'm an expert. But you want to make sure that you do know kind of everything you're talking about. Like when you're telling people, when you're using specific words especially, you want to make sure that there's a specific meaning attached to those words. So when someone comes back to you and asks you to explain what you meant, that you're able to explain that. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and let Doug go ahead and start talking a little bit about how he got into LARP as well, and how he got into diversity and inclusion work.
So, Douglas Allen, just to reiterate that again,
he's Dr. Douglas Allen. He won't tell you, but I'm going to tell you.
I got into diversity work, like I said, early, and I'll talk about that kind of the practitioner versus the expertise in a little bit versus experience. But I've been doing diversity work for a long time because I've been kind of in, I guess, what could be seen as social justice circles for a long time. And you really don't realize you're doing it when you're doing it a lot of times. So many of you who are asking, how do you get into this work? How do you start doing the work? I would argue that many of you are probably already doing some of the work already. And that what the difference is just different levels of awareness of what you're doing. That kind of started back when I was in undergrad at Troy University. It was a pretty white university, but we were kind of organizing around trying more the marginalized communities around Troy University, specifically around at the time the Chinese community and the Black community. Then I took it into my first job as a high school teacher, where I was teaching in Monroe High School in Albany, Georgia. It was a kind of Title I school, they called it at the time, which was low income, and they were getting budget cuts because of No Child Left Behind and low academic scores. So I became a teacher in that school, and one of the things I really tried to do was try to figure out what was messing up education, essentially, because most of the time people put the onus on the students or even on the teachers themselves. And what I wanted to think about was, how is education failing the teachers and the students instead? And so when I was doing all of that, I wasn't a DEI professional, but what I would argue is that even when I was doing those things, asking the correct questions was doing some of the DEI work before I knew what DEI really was doing. And so asking questions about the systems and about the institutions is one of the places that you can start, that really helps a lot, instead of thinking, okay, where are the deficiencies in the people themselves? Then I actually started doing DEI work once I started getting into grad school, and started doing more social justice education. Specifically at Florida State University, I gave a number of workshops in a number of different departments over at the med school, and then took that into my first job at Middle Tennessee State as a professor, where I gave work. I've been giving workshops to the Vanderbilt nursing school for the last couple of years on diversity and inclusion. So I took that kind of expertise and just kind of kept building on it slowly and surely. Along with the LARPing, I was kind of going hand in hand. I started LARPing when I got into grad school, and then I think I guess I'm not LARPing anymore because we're out in Kansas, but I had been LARPing since around 2013, 2014. And so I took that kind of thought process into LARPing, and then when I became an ST, a storyteller, one of the kind of runners of the LARP, I took all of those expertise that I'd gotten from my schooling, but also my experiences in social justice work, to try to question all the decisions that we made. And I think that's another piece as well, is that there's different levels of power for everyone. Players have certain power, but STs also have power that they have to realize that they're wielding, either for good or for bad, right? So that gets me into kind of the three set that I wanted to talk about. People are doing practicing of DEI work when they are working towards diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Like, whether you have the terminology behind you, whether you have the schooling behind you, whether you have workshops that you've led or attended, regardless of that, if you are doing something to further diversity, equity, and inclusion in an institution, you are doing DEI work. Now, that has different levels. Some of that is being an active bystander. So if you see something happening, you say something and you intervene. Some of that is questioning some of the things that you see as either making you uncomfortable or other people uncomfortable, and speaking up. Some of that is, if you're an ST, thinking about, okay, maybe we need to ask people about this decision that we're making. Maybe we're overlooking somebody's experiences. We need to make sure we're paying attention to the different experiences as well. So all of that is DEI work, even if you don't have the background. Now, then you have like the DEI professional, and that's usually people who are doing the work and oftentimes getting paid for it, right? So you have the people who are doing the work, and then you have people who are doing work and getting paid for it, which that's the dream if you're already passionate about the DEI work. That also oftentimes includes making sure that you have an expertise behind it as well. So, like Mytrice was saying before, knowing the words, knowing the buzzwords, having definitions for yourself so that they don't become just terminology that you throw out, but instead something that is a part of your thought process. And I would say the other thing is that DEI professionals are doing that oftentimes people who are doing DEI work on the lay side are not for any wrong purposes, but I would say that if you're doing DEIs professionally, you have to have a plan forward to be proactive, right? So it's not just the response that you're doing, but you're trying to be proactive about the DEI work and thinking forward as well, because you've had the schooling or the workshops or the certificates or stuff to help you think about what should we be looking for and what are the pitfalls. And then finally, the experiences go hand in hand with either one of them, right? So a lot of people get into DEI work, as Mytrice was talking about, because they've had personal experiences that made it important to them. Experiences are important, and here's where I want to make sure that the three different things aren't put in a hierarchy. All of these three things are necessary and important, and one is not necessarily more important than the other. In fact, most of the time, a lot of better DEI work is being done without DEI professionals. And so, one of the things I would tell you is that experiences are important, but we also need to make sure we're not confusing them with expertise. In the sense that your experiences are filtered by your other pieces of life as well, right? And so when we're thinking about DEI work, we have to try to think about people that are outside of our own life experiences. And DEI professionals need the experiences of people who are marginalized, particularly within the institutions that you're working in, to help you do the best job you can do. So we need the experiences. We need the professionals who can try to come up with a cohesive plan, and we need people who are going to be doing the grunt work and the groundwork, the kind of yeoman's work of people on the ground doing it, even though they're not being paid. It requires all three subsets to make these things work. One of the things that I wanted to echo with Mytrice as well was the minority tax. I think a lot of times people who are like me, I mean, I don't present as any kind of marginalized community, and I would be what Jillian Rose calls a master signifier. I have all of the kind of privileges that you can stack up. I'm a man. I'm white. I'm cisgender. I'm heterosexual. I'm what society would call reasonably good health. Like all of the different master signifiers that you can stack up, I have. One of the things that keeps people that are like me from doing work that would help society is paralysis by analysis, where you step back and you say, "Oh, I shouldn't be doing anything because it's not my fight." I think that's the biggest misnomer that we have right now in social justice work, is that it's not your fight. Just because this is an experience that's happening to Black people, they're part of your community, so it's your fight, right? People are your fight. And so I think one of the big misnomers we have right now is people stepping back and saying, "I'm not going to do anything because I don't want to take a lead, or I don't want to say something when it's not my place to say something." I get that, and there's a real problem. There can be a problem with people taking too much of a lead, but I would rather tell someone to step back than to step up, because that's the problem that I oftentimes see, is trying to get people to step up is the biggest issue. And so, along with what Mytrice was talking about, the minority taxing, the reason why minority taxing is such an issue is because so many people who could be stepping up don't step up to do anything. And that goes especially for people who are in power, not just from an identity subset, but also from a power subset. So STs, people who are storytellers or leading LARPs, aren't stepping up, but instead trying to lay back and just go with the flow. Which I'll stop here in a second, but I wanted to hit a second piece of what Mytrice was talking about, which was about the policy and the institutional pieces here. I typically, when I think about discrimination or DEI work, I think of it in two different subsets. One of which is compliance. that's what I call the easy work. Like, make sure that you got people who are diverse, make sure that you're not being overtly racist, make sure you're not being overtly ableist, make sure you're doing a whole number of different things, right? Like, check the boxes of make sure that we're not going to end up on the nightly news. But that's the easy stuff. Like, that's the legalistic compliance stuff that institutions can do. What diversity and inclusion work actually is going this next step where you're proactive in responding to situations. You're bringing in people and not just having them as pictures on your website, but active members of your community contributing to the way that you do things and contributing to critiquing yourself. I think there's a really good thing that I use with my students a lot of times. In diversity and inclusion work, a lot of times people say we need to hear the problems that are happening in our institution, or we need to hear from the people that are experiencing discrimination. That's great, but hearing is passive. What I want you to do is listen. You need to be listening to the people, the marginalized people in your institution. And the reason why I make the distinction is listening is an active verb versus hearing, as I see, as passive, right? So you can hear what someone says, but you don't do anything. Listening is active. To listen, you have to both hear what they're saying and then turn that around into doing something, right? Whether you're responding to them, whether you're taking an action off of what they've told you, but listening is an active piece of what you have to do. And so what I would encourage you to do is make sure you are moving away from hearing what marginalized communities are saying and instead listening to marginalized communities, where you are taking an active role and an active purpose after what they've told on the issues that they've told you about. The kind of last piece that I'll talk about is kind of allyship. And we've touched on this a little bit, where I've said a lot of times the biggest problem is getting people to step up, not to step back. We've had a couple, I think we've already actually had a couple of questions about this, and we'll address those more specifically later. But what I would argue is that we oftentimes get too caught up in who we aren't rather than who we are. So one of the things that I like about what LARPing in Color is doing, and one of the things that I like about what Mytrice has been doing, is that I'm not sure that any diversity and inclusion professional can come into a LARP and tell you what you need to do. And the reason why I say that is because our identities are not just our marginalizations, they're also who we are, right? And so it's not just a DEI professional, anyone who can walk in there. You need a LARPer who's doing DEI work, right? You need someone who's played D&D if you're wanting to make if you're wanting to think about your D&D game, or when you're making a custom D&D book for your own kind of custom brewed D&D game, right? Like, you need somebody who's done the stuff that's part of their identity. And so when we think about intersectionality, we oftentimes think about what Kimberly Crenshaw or Patricia Hill Collins might talk about as kind of the axes of domination, the multiple different marginalizations we have. I also want you to think about that sometimes some of the most key identities that you can have. Sorry, my child is moving around the house, and I want to make sure that she's not dying while we're talking. Some of the most important identities that you have are things that you have that connect you and not that separate you. And so you can't just grab any DEI professional to come into, I'm just going to broadly, nerddom, right? You need somebody who's a nerd, who's doing DEI professional work, to really understand what, one, you're trying to do, why you're doing it, and to not constantly be thinking in the back of their mind, what have I gotten myself into? Who are these people, right? You need them to be one of you. And so one of the things you want to think about is try to think about all the identities that have us connected as you're doing the work, and that connection can help with what I've been talking about with stepping back versus stepping up. It becomes your fight because that's your community, right? And so one of the reasons why I was excited to be able to be here today was that, to be completely honest, it seemed like this panel was on the on the edge of not being able to be done. Like, it was just going to end up having to be Mytrice. And Mytrice asked me and was like, hey, I really don't want to have to talk for the full 45 minutes. Can you come and help take some of the load? That's one of the things that I wanted to do, not to like toot my own horn. I'm not trying to do that. I just want to give an example of saying, okay, one of the things that I can do is I can come here and I can speak for 10, 15 minutes to try to take some of the load so that Treese isn't doing it all by herself, right? That one of the things I can do is I can show a face and say, look, it's marginalized people aren't the only people who have to be out here doing the work that LARPing in Color is trying to do, right? That what you need to do is realize that we are part of the community, that we are together, and we need to fight for each other, regardless of whether your experience is negative or not, right? Like, that if someone else is hurting, we need to hurt with each other, and we need to solve it. I'm gonna stop there because I think the one other piece that I think I want to talk about, I can probably answer in the questions. So.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So yeah, we do absolutely have some questions here. So we did ask early if people had questions, they could message us on either Facebook or in Discord. We can't promise that we can't promise that we'll be able to get to all of the questions if we have more, but we will go ahead and jump in and answer questions that were sent to us early because there's only a couple of those. So this first one, how do you address intersectionality when consulting on DEI and accessibility topics? This one's from Tara. For example, one marginalization or disability doesn't mean I can or should speak to them all, but I am qualified to speak generally on these topics and specifically about my own marginalizations. How do I convey that and get paid for my labor without sounding like I'm here to be an expert on something outside of my lane? I'm especially concerned because my disabilities aren't even visible most of the time, so it appears that the only marginalization I can be sensitive to is gender as a cis white woman.
Yeah, so I grapple with that myself as well. When you don't want to like come in as the expert on everything diversity, and that's kind of what people expect when you show up. Like when they contact you and like, hey, can you do a little bit of consulting or talk to me about how I can make this more diverse? They'll ask you about very specific marginalized communities that you don't have expertise over, and this has happened to me mostly in my professional experience at universities, just because they hired me and they were like, obviously I'm from marginalized communities, but I'm also kind of expected to be an expert in Asian American communities, right? And like, I'm not Asian American, I'm not an expert, but at some point I have kind of like a general understanding of just diversity and inclusion practices that aren't specific to that community. And generally what I do is I explain that up front. That's the best I could do, is like, hey, look, I have education in this generally. I have experience in this specifically. I have education in this specifically, or have worked very closely with these communities or very close to these communities. These are community, and then tell what communities I don't have a lot of expertise about or even with. Because sometimes you can have some education about a community or a culture or a group, but not really actually interact with them. So disability, I think, is a really good one for me, because I do a lot of disability inclusion activism, and I headed the program for disability inclusion at Vanderbilt, and I was not a person with a disability. What I did though was I reached out, and this is not something you can always do, I'll start with that, but I reached out to the community that I was talking to. So because it was university, I reached out to students, faculty, and staff who identify openly as having disabilities that I could talk to, and student organizations that were about those identities. And I said, hey, I'm being paid to be a diversity person at this. I know that disability is often overlooked when we talk about diversity. I think it's important. What do you think we need to do? What can I do to uplift your voices? And what can you tell me that will help me educate myself? And so what I generally try to do is, if it's available, just talking to that community and working with them instead of trying to do things for them and assuming that I know best because I'm a professional. And if you don't have access to those people so you can talk to them, is to just be upfront with whoever you're talking to and be like, look, I'm not an expert on how you should have interactions with people with disabilities, for example. Like, I don't know anything about that. I'm not an expert. So I can give you general kind of help with how to be good to humans, like people in general, like how to not be an asshole. But if for this particular, if you're looking for someone to talk about these particular communities, you should reach out to somebody in that community, or I can connect you with someone I know who can help with that specifically. So you never want to talk. I mean, I don't like even talking on behalf of a community, period. Like, I don't like to say that as the Black representative of Black female LARPers, right? Like, I don't want to do that. But it's even worse when you're trying to deal with a community that you're not even a part of, because you don't want to be seen as a person who's coming in and kind of saying that you're an expert on something you've never experienced. And I don't know, Doug, do you have anything to add?
I think you hit most of it. Transparency, right? Like, as Mytrice was talking about, the transparency of saying, look, these are the things that I feel comfortable speaking to, and these are the things that I feel comfortably uncomfortable speaking to, and then these are the things that I'm not qualified to speak it all about, right? So transparency with the people you're working with, I think, is the main thing. The biggest thing is transparency with the communities that you're talking about or talking with. So, like I said, DEI professionals all the time can't do their work if they don't have a relationship with the communities, because you need the experiences coming into your plan and your work. And so I think even more important than whether you personally have experienced a bunch of these different categories is, do you have a relationship with the community? Because even if you are a first gen student like myself, if I didn't hang out with a bunch of other first gen students, and so I had experiences myself about being a first gen student, but I don't know if those experiences are the same thing that other first gen students are struggling with unless I talk to other first gen students. So even if you're part of a community, talk and be part of that community in order to speak, because listening to those concerns and then acting on them is the most important thing. So I think transparency and listening comes back to that a lot of times.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your answers. Next couple, we've got about 4 or 5 right now. Let's see. Do you have any tips for someone who would like to begin this work but can't afford formal education?
Yeah, I would say it's always easier if you're a student at a college or university. There's a good chance that if you are currently enrolled as a student, that there is some kind of free education that the school will do. And I know everybody's not a student for sure, but that's kind of like the easy, quick one. As far as education, that's a little harder. I mean, you can kind of look for resources yourself online as much as possible. I think LARPing in Color is a good place to start, especially if there's going to be continued webinars or some kind of like education webinars, things like that, workshops. Those are your best bet. And a lot of times you can find something online. I would have to like compile probably a good set of resources for that, but and free is hard. That's why it's hard for me. Just because there's professional organizations too that have conferences, and a lot of times you can get education through those. Like I went to the AHEAD conference, which is the Association for Higher. I don't know, but it's a disability inclusion association for higher education, and that was like a week long education. But of course, that probably cost $400 or $500, and I was lucky enough to be employed by an employer who would pay for that for me to go do. I mean, that's something else though. Actually, you could look through your employer and see if there are professional development opportunities. But with any education in America, it's just hard to find free resources. Mm-hmm. But I think that LARPing in Color probably will be the place to come back to as the resource list grows. I know that one thing I'm trying to do, and this doesn't help anybody right now, so I'm sorry, but I'm working on getting my master's in instructional design. And one of the things I want to do is be able to create some kind of education that is free for people to use and something that's web-based. So some kind of training that they can take online that's not like the John is black and you said something mean about black people, should you have done it, right? Like that's every single discrimination test or workshop, they call them, that I have to take every year to show that I'm not a racist at a job. But what I want is something a little more in depth that allows you to kind of interact with it on a website. And it's just something I haven't done yet because I don't have it. I'm working on getting that expertise, but there might be other people out there doing it. And one thing I will try to do as an action item for myself is try to help compile some of those kind of resources and try to send them to LARPing in Color and see if that can be hosted somewhere.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So this next question comes from Angie. LARPs are not known to pay people for their time. Volunteers are what run LARPs, unless one person owns the game. I think a diversity consultant service is a needed service deserving to be paid, just as kitchen staff at a LARP does as well. How would you advise a LARP to go about getting a consultant if the LARP runs off volunteers and pay would mean in-game resources or food and such? So just real quick, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well, but I do want to just shout out what we're trying to do with LARPing in Color real quick. Again, we're running a fundraiser this week, and a big chunk of what we're doing with that fundraiser money is specifically to help people with the question that you have right now is like, we want to pay people for diversity work. We want to pay a consultant to come look over our stuff. We don't want to just ask for free emotional labor all the time. And so a lot of what we're going to do with our fundraising money is start a grant program specifically for the purpose of game organizers and different people who want to be able to do this work and get sensitivity readings done. In the future, hopefully, we're shooting for just like end of the summer to launch a program where you can come talk to us. We we'll kind of ask you a couple of questions. We'll let you fill out a form. There might be a couple of additional things that we'll need, and then you can apply for a grant that will pay up to 100% of the cost of your consultant work. Again, we don't have the details of that built out just yet, but that's something that we want to do, and that's why we're so kind of passionate about this work, because we want to see it done, but we also want to see that people get paid for this kind of work because it's important. We shouldn't just ask people to go back and remember their traumatic experiences so that someone else so that these resources are available is the short answer. So that's what we're trying to do with LARPing in Color. But as far as other stuff, I'm happy to hear Mytrice, Dr. Doug, if you guys have any thoughts on that.
I was going to redirect it back to you on that one, just for the LARPing in Color program, the grant program, because that's definitely the number one way right now, for sure. Otherwise, it's difficult. I mean, it's just hard. I guess if you're asking someone who's at the LARP, I know, because like you mentioned the kitchen staff, kitchen staff probably should be paid. I did kitchen staff for a long time. That's some hard, grueling work to do on a site. So I know that some LARPs would offer kind of the compensation in the sense that they would give free games, and some people might take that as a compensation. It just depends on who you're talking to. So like if I was still local to a LARP that I still cared about, I would be more than willing to do that, because that saves me $50, $60, $70 a game. That's plenty for me. Like, you just have to ask people and talk to them, because you might be able to do some kind of trade. Like, look, we care about this work. And a lot of times you'll have a practitioner who's like, I care about it too, so I really want to help you, like me, who will be like, but I feel like I should be compensated in some way. But I think that even offering like meal credits at your LARP could be a thing. You could waive the fee for people or give them X amount of games that they can play. You could offer them special characters maybe in return. I don't know. There's different things like that. You could also, and I hate upcharges, because then that puts another separate toll on people who want to play games, and it makes them less accessible. But if you could do a very small amount of money, like $1, especially if you have like 50 players, that's $50 extra that you could take, and you could put it towards like kind of having that consulting. Another thing, I'm consulting with a LARP now. One thing I wanted to suggest is actually checking out LARPing in Color's Patreon. And even if if you subscribe, even at the lowest level, like $3 a month, you're putting money into an organization that's then going to turn around and help people. And then I think there's actually a level that's higher for LARPs that can afford it more with like a bigger amount of money, where you can actually have access to more resources and people. And I think that's a really good resource as well. I don't know, Douglas, if you have any.
Yeah, just real quickly. I mean, you're right that a lot of this stuff runs on volunteers, and one of the things that I see a lot is LARPs offering extra whatever monetary service your LARP runs in, right? To donate items like water and stuff. You could start a fund, much like LARPing in Color is doing right now, a fundraiser to do that and explicitly say, look, we're going to start a fundraiser. We want to get a diversity consultant to look over our stuff. We need volunteers to either offer money or to offer baked goods that we can sell. Or and the last thing I would say is if you already have a LARP that is a nonprofit, go to corporations and see if they'll sponsor you to do a bake sale or a diversity consultant. Sometimes these corporations, and as much as we don't want to get into the corporate world, sometimes these corporations will do it just to make sure that their name looks good for some people. And so I look for alternative ways to get that money if money is an issue as well.
Yeah, piggybacking actually off of Doug, you'd be surprised at how supportive a LARP community can be and how much they'll come together, and how suddenly you hear a lot of people talk about like, it's an expensive hobby, I'm poor, I don't have any money. But as soon as someone's like, I need something, like 30,000 people flood in and they're just like, here, take my money, you need it, we care about you. Even something like Doug was saying, I don't know what all the systems are for every single LARP, but whatever your like brownie system or the system, like you said, you donate water, you get like some kind of points that you trade for things in games like downtimes or items or whatever you use in your system. You'd be surprised how many people will be like, I donate $10 to get one of those, and then if you get 5 people, you have $50 that you can start putting towards those funds.
Yep.
People usually do actually come together, surprisingly, for things like this.
All right, we've got 2 more questions before we're going to try to finish up here. Next one: how do you reach out to the LARP community in ways that invite inclusion? I feel like I'm going to do it wrong. Is it too overt to say we would love more diversity in our game?
No, I mean, I think there's ways to say it that make it awkward. It's like we would like our game to be diverse. Come, diverse people, be with us. But I think just trying to picture that as much as possible on a website. So if you have a website for a LARP, just being very specific about how you're advertising. So things like having a page that says accessibility. And then when you go to that page, you're like, these are the sites we use, and this is how accessible it might be for someone who might have problems with walking, or someone who gets tired, or someone who gets overstimulated. We have these spaces that you can go to. Like something as simple as that can bring a lot of people in, and just kind of picturing it as much as possible. I don't want to encourage you to be the camera guy on campus that looks for the black kids to go take a picture to put on the front of the website of a PWI, which is a predominantly white institution. But picturing different people as much as possible, and thinking about those people when you're writing your LARP. And people can see that usually. But I think it's fine to say that you embrace diversity, and you want to be as open as possible and as welcoming as possible, because it at least tells people that you're trying.
Awesome. Okay, so this is probably a final question for tonight. Thank you so much. If anybody does have additional questions, that's what we're here for. By all means, send us a question to our email. You can reach out to hello@larpingincolor.com, or to our Facebook. That's just facebook.com/larpingincolor. We'll be happy to either answer questions ourselves or find someone who can answer those questions. So this will be the last one for tonight. How do we best develop that expertise in D&I work? Sometimes it feels like D&I experience is only seen as valuable if you've been in direct formal leadership, which can be hard to do.
Well, it depends on where you are and what you're doing. I'd say it helps. I don't think leadership is necessarily the word you want, but some kind of interaction with it, right? Like my experience is that I worked on a committee, and then I had to work through that committee before I could become like chairs of subcommittees and all these other different things. But even just being a person on those committees helps. So I guess what you want to do is I don't know, do we want to create LARP committees? I feel like that's what I'm getting towards. It's like kind of creating. But I also hate committees. But giving yourself the room to learn and grow, and then doing some kind of work so that when people ask you, you can tell them, well, this is the kind of work that I've done. And that could be something as simple as just working in your own community. For example, even though I was working as a professional in Nashville, but one of the things I tried to do, but this was during COVID, so I wasn't able to, is I was going to volunteer at Bridges for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, because I wanted to kind of put myself out there as a helper for a community. And I was like, I don't have a lot of interaction with the deaf community, and that's a community I would like to learn more about and support in any way that I can. So just going and becoming a volunteer there would have been like something I could say you could look back at and be like, this is the kind of work that I've done to educate myself and to help people. And that's not anything you have to do with any kind of like formal training or leadership. And Doug, did you have something?
Yeah. I mean, I think the community thing is the thing I was wanting to get at, is that you can look for ways to get involved in organizing in your community, and it doesn't have to be with LARP either, right? Like Teresa was talking about volunteering with an organization, or you could volunteer with people organizing protests or different social justice work, and just getting involved and learning to be a good follower helps prepare you for the experiences that you'll need to be able to organize that when it's your time to step up, right? And so just getting out there and doing as much as possible with people who are already doing the work, and getting to know people who are doing the work, can help you realize, again, I said at the beginning of my stuff, you're probably already doing the work. It's just a matter of trying to translate that into experiences that let you that let you start organizing the work.
Perfect. Okay, so I think we're going to finish up here. Thank you all so much for joining our first webinar and what we hope to be a lot of webinars. This is what we're here for, is to try to provide resources, because at the end of the day, we just want to see more diversity in our favorite hobbies here, you know. So I do want to give a couple shout outs real quick. We had a couple of milestones just over the last day or two. So today, we actually hit just over 1,000 followers on Facebook. That's an incredible goal. Thank you all so much for sharing what we're trying to do, sharing our message, sharing our Facebook posts. We're going to keep that going. We want to provide those free tips. So that's incredible. Thank you so much for that. And you guys, oh my gosh, we set a goal to reach just $1,000 by the end of this week. And within just 48 hours, just shy of 48 hours of having launched our fundraiser, you guys have already doubled that. So over the course of this live stream, we are now over $2,000 in funding, and all of that money is going to go to making sure that we can keep providing these resources and keep paying people for this kind of work. We appreciate you guys so much, and on behalf of the rest of the leadership team, we're so excited to be able to keep doing this work because of your support. So if you want additional information, again, our website just launched. This live stream is going to go up on our YouTube page and on our website, so you can go to larpingincolor.com. We'll be happy to post that as soon as we can get that available, and keep looking. We're going to be posting like monthly articles and interviews with people, just all kinds of information, trying to make this resource something that is useful for everybody in as many situations as we can. So if you have any questions, again, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to take your questions, or if you need help with consultants. That's the other big service that we offer, is that we can connect you with the consultant. We have a growing list of consultants on every level who can help you with this work. So if you need help with getting connected with a consultant, please reach out to us. We can help you with that connection. Beyond that, thank you so much. We're going to finish up here. We hope you have a fantastic night, and we'll see you soon. See you later.